Spider-Man does whatever a Spider-Man does. Welcome everyone to Caleb Watches Movies, the channel where I, Caleb, randomly select one of the many movies that I own and I watch and review them for you, except for today when we're doing some ranking stuff, and that's what we're doing with one of the biggest superhero characters that have ever existed, especially the most popular Marvel character, Spider-Man. And the reason why we are ranking all of the Spider-Man movies that have come out over the last several decades is because today is the release of the third MCU Spider-Man film, Spider-Man No Way Home, where we're gonna have villains from the MCU, and villains from the Amazing Spider-Man, and people from the Raimi Spider-Man movies, and probably even some more Spider-Man showing up here and there. And if you've been keeping up on my channel for this last couple of weeks, we've been talking about all the Spider-Man films that have come out over the last several decades, so it's finally nice to get them all here ranked with each other. Of course, Spider-Man No Way Home is not going to be on this list because I haven't seen it yet. It just came out today, leave me alone. And also, this list is not going to contain films that Spider-Man was part of an ensemble, so Captain America Civil War and Avengers Infinity War and Endgame are not going to be on this list because those are not Spider-Man movies, those are Avengers movies. And yes, Captain America Civil War is an Avengers movie, it is not a Captain America movie, which was my main issue with that film. That's the whole rant that I'm going to go down. I'm not inviting people to start commenting on this video with that. So this list is my personal list, my personal ranking of all of these Spider-Man films that have come out in the last several decades. I'm not saying that this is the definitive list. I'm saying this is my list. So for those of you who feel the need to comment about how wrong I am, it's my opinion. I am entitled to it, just as you are entitled to your opinion. And now that I've said that, let's get started with me ranking all of the Spider-Man movies that have come out. There are actually 14 of them. Let's get started. Starting off at the bottom of the list, probably the worst one out of all of them because you really had no idea what was going on. It was just kind of cool that they went outside of America, is Spider-Man The Dragon Challenge. It was a TV movie released in 1981, and before Spider-Man went far from home in 2019, he already went to China in 1981. So what was the big deal? But it was the third TV movie that was released in theaters, but then also released on TV, starring Nicholas Hammond as Spider-Man Peter Parker. I liked him as Peter Parker. The problem with these 70s TV series, TV movies is that, well, you know, you can't have people swinging on lines from the top of buildings a lot in these TV movies, so the stuff that we get of Spider-Man is very far and in between. And you'll also see in this movie that Spider-Man is going up against this rich, old, white guy, which was like the staple of villains in the 1970s TV series. We had great characters like Scorpion and Doc Ock and Venom and Green Goblin, but in the TV series, no, he's just gonna go up against some rich, evil, old white guy. So there you go. At number 13 is the most recent Spider-Man entry. Of course, not Spider-Man No Way Home. I'm talking about Venom Let There Be Carnage, a follow-up to the original from 2018 that actually I really enjoyed. It was weird, it was strange, but it was enjoyable. But what they did here with Venom Let There Be Carnage was they shot the film, and then they were like, hey, let's cut it there, and then, hey, let's cut it there, and then let's just tie them together with no transitions at all, and let's just go, and there is no backstory, there is no growth to these characters. The climax of this film is when Cletus Cassidy, which is the best name in all comic book history, Cletus Cassidy goes after his girlfriend and gets her out of prison, and instead of fleeing, they decide that they want to go and get married, so they go through the whole ceremony, which I'm sitting there thinking, why do you need to do this? This is so freaking stupid. And then also Venom and Eddie Brock decide to split ways, even though in the original they were like, hey, we need to be together to survive, and if we don't, we're gonna die. So why do we need to do this? Everything about this movie screams studio interference. This thing is cut up to shit. This needed another 30 minutes to feel like a full film. The only reason why this movie exists is for that post-credit scene that I'm not going to spoil here because it is a pretty new film that not everyone has gotten to see yet. But Venom Let There Be Carnage is one of the worst films that I have seen and reviewed this year, and it's one of the worst comic book films that has ever been made. At number 12 is the first live-action version of Spider-Man that we ever saw on screen, Spider-Man 1977. This was a TV pilot for the TV show. It was actually like a small mini-movie. And the first outing for Nicholas Hammond as Spider-Man, and like I said before, I like him as Spider-Man. I like this tale of him getting bitten by a spider and him figuring out his powers. And to see an actual live-action man crawling, what looks to be crawling up a wall, was actually very impressive. If I was a kid in the 70s and I was watching that on TV, I would be really happy and wanna be a spider myself, even though I'm not the biggest fan of spiders. But this movie, you could tell there was so much limitation that they had, that whenever they were climbing up the wall, that was like the big thing, the big climax, the big stunt of the movie or the TV episode, which if you read the comics, if you watch the cartoons, you know, he would swing on webs and climb up the walls all the time. So to go from that to a TV series where they're like, hey, look, he's climbing up the wall and this is the big climax. It's like, okay, cool. And also they try to emulate the comics. So how he was drawn in the comics, he was always looking like this and he was always walking around with his arms and his shoulders up high like he's snooping or sneaking around. It's cheesy fun, it's kind of stupid, but it's also, you gotta have respect for it, because this is where it all started. At number 11 is the next TV Spider-Man film called Spider-Man Strikes Back. What he was striking back against, I honestly could not tell you. Basically, like what I said before, he was striking back against a rich, old white guy, because those were the villains in the day. But this one had an amazing plot of this professor on this campus bringing plutonium on campus without the whole campus knowing, but telling his grad students. And all of his grad students, including Peter Parker, is like, no, you shouldn't do that. That is dangerous. If even just a little bit of it leaks out, it could kill hundreds of people on this campus alone. Why are you doing this? And the professor's like, well, it's science and stuff. And then the plot of this movie is that the other graduate students, not Peter Parker, but the other graduate students, decide to steal the plutonium in a way to convince the professor that, hey, this is a bad idea, because see, we stole it. That means anyone could steal it. And then when they don't listen to them, or the professor's like, no, we need to keep doing this, they're like, well, we'll convince you that it's still a bad idea, so you know what? We're gonna take the plutonium, and we're gonna actually build a bomb. And then you'll have to listen to us that this is a bad idea. So to prevent that there is any type of nuclear bomb, weapon, atomic bombs that could be used against people in the city, you decide to steal it and build your own bomb, to show that, hey, this could actually happen, so we shouldn't do this. That is some Nicolas Cage National Treasure type thinking. The Declaration of Independence is going to be stolen, so in order for the Declaration of Independence not to be stolen, I need to steal it, because if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it, and that's bad. Yeah, that all makes sense. But this movie also has Joanna Cameron in it as the lead girl and reporter who is coming in to get an interview with Spider-Man, but Peter Parker was like, no, he can't do that because he doesn't do that stuff. It was cool seeing her here because like the day after I watched this film for this review, it was announced that she had passed away, and that's like the second or third time that has happened in the last 3 or 5 years for me, where I've watched a movie starring an actress or an actor, and then like 2 days later, it's announced they've passed away. So, I mean, out of respect for her, I gotta put a little bit higher than the original Spider-Man movie in 1977. This is gonna be the last TV movie here that's gonna appear on this list. We're gonna go to more mainstream following up. At number 10 comes one of the most disappointing movie-going experiences that I've ever had in the theater with Spider-Man 3. We had two amazing entries in the Sam Raimi universe with Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, that when Spider-Man 3 was coming out and it was announced that Venom was gonna be in it, I was all in. I was so excited. And then when I went to go see the film and left it, I was like, what the hell happened here? Basically what happened is that Sony was like, well, you need to do Venom, and Sam Raimi was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do Sandman, I want to do Vulture, and other villains like that. But Venom, it's the most popular villain, so you gotta do it. you always got to do it, so there. And you can tell that Raimi's directing was just not into it because things were just thrown out on screen. We have emo Peter Parker Spider-Man dancing through the streets and coming out of clothing shops and grinding his pelvis, and it was just, what is going on here? And then we get Venom, but then we never get the Venom face because we always need to have Topher Grace's face showing because he's an actor and he needs FaceTime, so... And then the eventual breakup between Peter Parker and Mary Jane, Kirsten Dunst, who you can tell just doesn't want to be on set at all. There's James Franco, who is having some great pie and loving it. And plus there's also the situation of this Venom symbiote stuff being a suit that you can just hang on a hanger. And if he can do that, there's a scene in there where he looks into the closet, and there it is, and he's trying to decide, do I do the original suit, or do I do the black suit that I've been wearing? And then he puts on the black suit. Well, if that's the case, then the whole him in the bell tower and him ripping it off, that shouldn't have been an issue, because he can just take it off and be fine. He doesn't need to be emo. So what's the conflict here? It's just a lot of plot that's thrown out there that is just so mundane and so surface level, something completely different than we got from Spider-Man 2 that went deep into the character's psyche. Spider-Man 3, a huge letdown, a huge disappointment. It made me physically angry in the theater. I hated this frickin' movie. At number 9 is a film that Spider-Man is not actually in, but it is dealing with a Spider-Man character, so it does make the list, and that is Venom. What a weird, strange, and interesting movie this was. A movie that I thought was never going to happen, because they kept talking about it. Tom Hardy denied roles in Suicide Squad and really dove all into this character, but it was like, we're not seeing any trailers or production photos. So you're saying it's happening, but I don't believe it. And then even going into the theater, I was like, this isn't really happening. But what I saw on screen was actually very interesting. Seeing Tom Hardy develop the differences between Eddie Brock and also voicing and developing the character of Venom, to see him playing off of himself like that, I thought was very intriguing. The conflict of all these other symbiotes and trying to enslave the whole human race and shooting up another rocket from out of nowhere into space so they can go back to their home world. I mean, this is like 90s action superhero type stuff here that definitely would have worked in the 90s, but here in the 2010s, it was like, I think we're kind of past this surface level type storytelling, but I still think it was a fun enough time here to have. At number 8 comes an episode of the Japanese version of Spider-Man that actually did play in theaters in Japan, so it counts. It is Spider-Man from 1978. This is the only episode of that Spider-Man series that I watched. I love the choreography. I love the stunts of everything. This guy who's moving around actually looks like a Spider-Man crawling on walls, doing all of his stunt work, doing all of his fighting. He was actually in the Spider-Man suit, which the Nicholas Hammond's TV series barely had any at all. This guy can kick some ass, and I like it. But then it turned into a Power Rangers episode where he's going up against this evil monster shark thing who shoots torpedoes out of its mouth and then grows to enormous sizes. So Spider-Man calls his Marveler with his wristband, and that is like his own Megazord. That's like the coolest thing ever. As the movie starts and the main theme song is playing, reading the lyrics on screen of yeah, yeah, wow, and yeah, 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 wow. I'm like, yes, this is wonderful. I don't know what this is or what version of Spider-Man this is, but I am all in. And then you add the Megazord on top of that. I'm done. I am buying everything of this TV series. This is awesome. At number 7 is the first official big mainstream film of the web-slinger, that is Spider-Man from 2002. In my opinion, this was the movie that really kicked the whole superhero genre craze into high gear. Yes, we had Blade in 1998, and then we also had X-Men from 2000, which was the start of society taking superheroes in film seriously, but really it was Spider-Man did the big box office numbers. And Tobey Maguire, I think, is a good Peter Parker. He was good for the time. Definitely looking back on it now, I'm like, wow, you're really old playing a high schooler. But hey, you got cut for it. And also a great performance from Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin. The guy just screams villain whenever he's on screen. What sucked, though, is that he was put into this green mech helmet thing, so you couldn't see his facial reaction. And with a face like Willem Dafoe, why would you want to cover that up? But for people that hadn't read the comics before and never got into the whole comic book superhero thing, this introduced the mythos and the lore of Spider-Man to generations of people that is still latched onto them. And the only film that has given you the line of, with great power comes great responsibility. We have never gotten that line since this movie, so you gotta give it a lot of respect for actually giving us the Spider-Man line. At number 6 is kind of half of the original Spider-Man movie, but was rebooted in 2012 with Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man, a movie that had so much going for it. They wanted to reboot it because Sony was like, no, we don't want to do Spider-Man 4. Sam Raimi, you want to do Vulture, and we want to do Lizard, and all this different stuff. Let's just do a whole brand new thing, and we're going to reboot this after 10 years. So it starts, and there's this whole conspiracy theory behind the Parkers, and then we're introduced to Peter Parker, and he's this introverted genius who's at this public school who obviously shouldn't be because he's so freaking smart, and he's always stepping in and saving the little guy and protecting everyone else from bullies, even though it ends up him getting bullied himself. And then when bad things happen to his uncle, it becomes a revenge tale, and he goes out every night searching for the person who killed his uncle. And I really liked that, but then all of a sudden this film forgot all of that and turned into a stereotypical superhero film with him going up against the lizard monster. Because reptiles are the superior race, and we need to inject reptile DNA into all humans because they're superior, and that's reasons. And I said it in my Amazing Spider-Man reviews. Andrew Garfield is my favorite Peter Parker Spider-Man. He was just in the wrong movies because Sony wanted to do something different, but in their wanting to do something differentness, ended up doing something that's very cookie cutter and basically what they did in the original Spider-Man movie. At number 5, following on the heels from The Amazing Spider-Man, is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. That's right, the movie that really everyone hates because it makes no sense and it's shoehorning all of these different villains in here. I actually like more than the original The Amazing Spider-Man. 1, the CGI in here is spectacular. The fights with Spider-Man and Electro, and hell, even the fight with him and the Green Goblin Light character of Harry Osborn, and the death of Gwen Stacy and the web shooting out and actually looking like it's trying to reach for Gwen Stacy as she falls, and just adapting that whole storyline and those comic panels to life was beautiful, breathtaking, and I love them on screen. The problem with this movie, though, is that all of these individual scenes are amazing on their own, but you try to put them all together and give this whole movie an overall arc and an overall story, it doesn't make sense. Because really the studio just wants to get to the Sinister Six film and the Amazing Spider-Man 3 film when all of these characters come together to fight each other. Basically, Sony wanted their own Avengers like right away. They didn't want to build up at all. But this film showcases Andrew Garfield even more as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. There are moments in here where he's inspiring a little kid who's being bullied by kids from school and just walking him home and just introducing himself as Spider-Man, complimenting him on his little science fair project. That's Spider-Man to me. That is who Spider-Man should be. Andrew Garfield is my favorite. Again, as Spider-Man, he was just in the wrong movies at the wrong time. At number 4 is when everyone tried to forget about the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man films, and when Marvel Studios swooped in and was like, we are going to hatch a plan to bring Spider-Man to the MCU. And this was the first full-length featured Spider-Man film in the MCU, Spider-Man Homecoming. Tom Holland is a great Spider-Man and a Peter Parker. He's so young, he's so lovable, he's so connectable. You gotta love this guy. It's just where I put Andrew Garfield above Tom Holland is in the darkness that was happening to his character in that story. Really, with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, nothing really dark happens to this kid. He kind of really has everything kind of figured out and everything going for him. His financial situation with his aunt is seemingly okay. He's just trying to figure out, where he fits into the whole Avengers universe. But again, I just like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. And plus, this film also has Michael Keaton, who is amazing. He is a great villain, he's a great actor, and when he's in here, he's just having a good time. Just not too good. At number 3, and I gotta be honest, this film and the film that is in number 2, these were flip-flopping for me. I was going to put this film at number 2 because it was going to be my favorite live-action version of Spider-Man, but then something happened that I'll talk about here in the next film coming up. Here at number 3, I gotta put Spider-Man Far From Home, which really hurts my heart because for the longest time I was saying that Spider-Man Far From Home was my favorite live-action Spider-Man film because we get a little bit of that darkness for Tom Holland with him figuring out what he is supposed to do, finally. And him trying to reject his Spider-Man duties for a little bit of time, because he just wants to take a vacation. He's taking some mental health days. After the events of Avengers Endgame, he just wants to relax and go on vacation and hang out with MJ and tell her that he kind of likes her, whatever these kids do nowadays. And then we also introduce Mysterio in this tremendous way of making him a CGI visual effects artist, and how this movie's marketing just was trying to trick everyone and really presenting Mysterio as the perfect master of deceit, because that's who he is. The previews, the trailers, the first half of this movie was convincing you that this Mysterio guy is from a multiverse, from a different universe, and he's a superhero and he's trying to fight all of these elementals. Only for it to finally be revealed that he is the master of disguise and the master of deception. All of this was fake, and he even calls it out in the film, telling that people would believe anything that is presented to them, because that's where we are as a society right now. It's so meta, and I love it. Plus, Jake Gyllenhaal is an amazing actor, so to see him in the MCU is freaking fantastic. And this film leads up to an amazing mid-credits scene that is where we're at now with Spider-Man No Way Home, when everyone knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and J.K. Simmons has returned as J. Jonah Jameson. This movie is great, and it's one of the best MCU films in their whole history. But at number 2, I do have to put Spider-Man 2 here above Spider-Man Far From Home, and I'll tell you why. When I turned this film on to stream, I saw that I was like halfway through it, and I didn't know where I stopped months ago. So I started playing it from there. And it starts on the scene when Peter Parker is telling Aunt May the truth of what happened to Uncle Ben, that it was really his fault. And then shortly after that, we get the amazing speech from Aunt May about how there is a hero in all of us. I'm getting a little teary-eyed thinking about it because it's those moments, it's that darkness that Peter Parker goes through in his life that is needed for the Spider-Man mythos. And that's what Spider-Man 2 presents. That's why I'm putting it higher than Spider-Man Far From Home. Spider-Man 2 is typically hailed as one of the best Spider-Man superhero films ever made, and rightfully so. It still holds up today. The fight between Spider-Man and Doc Ock on the train is still breathtaking, even though we get the weird straining face from Tobey Maguire. This film shows the inner conflict of Peter Parker trying to balance his personal life and the Spider-Man life, and dealing with his biggest adversary, and that's poverty. But then also dealing with the truth about Uncle Ben and his Aunt May, and trying to tell Mary Jane that he does love her, even though he can't, because if he does, that makes her a target for villains in the future, even though technically he didn't tell her that he loved her, and then she was put into harm's way anyway, but you know, semantics. Spider-Man 2 is the best live-action version of Spider-Man that everyone should see, and it's a great thing to go back and watch every once in a while. However, Spider-Man 2 does not beat the very best Spider-Man film that has ever been released mainstream, and that is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I remember sitting back in my chair in the theater in tears, just being in awe of what I was seeing on screen, because the animation in here is so beautiful. There's different animation styles for every single different Spider-Man character that we see in here. Spider-Man Noir, Spider-Ham, Anime Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, and then the original Spider-Man. And this film also made me fall in love with Miles Morales, which was a character in the comics that I absolutely hated. I read his origin story in Ultimate Spider-Man, and I just hated who this character was. He was ungrateful for getting into this great school that he didn't want to be at, and then when Peter Parker dies in that comic, he picks up a Spider-Man costume because he was developing his own Spider-Man powers, and he's like, well, I guess I'll just do Spider-Man things. And hell, even everyone in the comics was like, dude, this is too soon, bruh. Not cool. So for this film to exist and to dive more into the character's backstory and his psyche, it made him more lovable for me, and I want to see more from this character and more from this multiverse. And you could do multiple different Spider-Man Spider-Verse films. I mean, they're doing a second one coming up in the next year. So much potential. The animation style is beautiful. The animation changes over time with the development of the spider powers for Miles Morales. He seems like he's kind kind of stop motion. He's kind of jerky at the beginning, but then as his spider powers develop more and he starts becoming a master of it, everything it's done with higher frame rates, and he looks smooth and confident and beautiful. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is by far the best Spider-Man film that has ever been released, and if you haven't seen it, you definitely need to, because it's one of the best animated films, one of the best films that has come out in the last 10 years. And there it is, my ranking of all of the Spider-Man films going all the way back to 1977. We finally did it. What did you think of my list? Do you agree or do you disagree? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who disagree, but whatever you thought, comment below, let me know what you thought about it. And as always, if you like what you see here, if you like my take on movies, hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that bell so you know the next time I'm releasing the next movie review. So guys, I will see you next time on the channel, but in the meantime, be well, be good to each other, and go watch a movie. Take care, guys.